Hi guys, welcome to lab session 4. Today we're going to be building some database driven applications in Java. So the reading for today's lab actually comes from chapter 13 from the text. We're only going to be really looking at the bits that talk about the JDBC connectors. So today we've got some introductory bits and pieces, usual housekeeping. We'll have a really quick revision of Java. Just to get you back up to speed of how to compile, to run through compiling your programs, and then we'll actually get your application, get you building a Java program that connects up to the Postgres databases using the JDBC connectors, and then you'll have some exercises to complete as well. So today's practical is all about connecting Java applications up to our database via the JDBC connector to our PostgreSQL database management system. So a database-driven application is basically any program that uses a centralized database to manage and drive its functionality. So basically any sort of persistent store of information there is used to drive the activity within the program. This is achieved by connecting your Java application up to the database management system, and you actually execute SQL statements within your program on the database to retrieve and manipulate the data. So before we get into that, we've actually got some housekeeping to run through first. So in order to connect up to your application up to the database, you actually need to specify the username and password of the user that you actually want to connect to the database. Now, up until this point in the course, you've actually been connecting to the database management system using the PSQL client program, which actually automatically connects up using your UNE username and password. So Postgres doesn't actually do any authentication on that; it just trusts that the system has actually authenticated you. Now, to avoid having you specify having to specify the your UNE username password in plain text in your Java programs, we've actually set up. We've actually created a new user account on the Postgres server for each student. So everybody enrolled in the course will actually have an additional account in Postgres that will actually have the name of the form, your UNE username _ apps. So for example, if you were student 1, your new database user would be student1 _ apps. So for example, mine's MLH8 _ apps, and the password for that account is actually your UNE student number. So my situation, they've used my system user ID, but you'll actually have this new set of credentials to actually log into your database. Now, you can actually create databases and log into your apps account using the CreateDB and PSQL client as usual. You just need to specify a username to stop the client from automatically logging in using your UNE credentials. And we do that by basically specifying by using the flag. So if we want to create a database, we call our CreateDB program, our CreateDB utility. We then specify that we want to connect up as a specific user using the -u flag, and we specify the user that we want to connect as. We then include this -w flag. Now the -w flag tells the PSQL or CreateDB program that you want to be prompted for the password. We then specify the host, which in the case of Turing is 127.0.0.1, and then we actually name the database that we want to create. So we can see here in this example, I've actually gone through and I've created the MLH8 apps prac4 database, and then I've logged into it using the same command line arguments here into the actual database, and you can see that it's created a new database for me. So just to be clear on that, you actually have this new apps user created in the database for you, so each student has that account. The password of that account is going to be your UNE student number. So whenever you create a database that you want to connect your Java applications up to, you'll have to do it using the using those flags and using that account. So once you've successfully logged into your newly created prac4 database that's been created via your apps user, you can actually go and then, as usual, import the company database that we've been working through. So we go through and we just use the /i command and we specify the path to our company database that we actually backed up from our first prac. So you can see here I've actually logged into my prac 3 database here, but I've logged in and I've specified that one. So that will work fine for your apps database. Now it's important that you set up and use your apps database and make sure you, for this particular prac, because we're going to be connecting Java programs up as this user to this database. So we're going to be connecting up as your apps user to the apps databases the apps database that you create as part of this process. So make sure you have that up and working before you move on. So note that when you actually run this script, so when you run your prac1 backup, your prac1 SQL dump script that you created, you'll actually get some errors. There's actually some commands in that script that change the owner of the relations from the default, which is a currently logged in user, to the original user that created them. They'll fail, but they can be ignored because the rest of the statements execute correctly, and we want the owners of those tables to actually be the current user. So we want those commands to actually fail there. So once you've run that, you should see run your /dt command, and you should get a list of your tables there from our company database. So moving on, I'm just going to have a very quick look at Java, just a really quick revision to get you just running, just on building and compiling and running Java programs. So most of you should remember this from first year, from COMP389. Basically, we have our Hello World program. So it's usually everyone's first program. So remember in Java that everything has to be specified within a class, and we're going to be just using Java in a very procedural sense today. We're not going to be doing any object-oriented programming, so you'll just be using the main function here. So remember, we need to declare our public static void main, and then we use our print line statement to print our hello world statement. Now, recall that compiling a Java program is done using the Java C application, so the Java compiler, and you can run your application by invoking the Java virtual machine with the Java command here. So we can see in this little sample session that I've actually compiled my Java program. We can see when we list that, you'll see the class files. We then can then actually run our hello world program, and it prints the output as expected there. For processing user input from the keyboard, you can actually use the input stream reader and buffered reader classes. So basically, we create an input stream reader, we connect it up to the system.in stream, which is actually a standard in stream for anybody coming from a C background. We then create a new buffered reader, and we connect that up to our input stream reader. So we specify the input stream reader that we've created here as an argument to the constructor for our buffered reader. We're then ready to actually read information out of that buffered reader. So we can see here we've got our example program that actually asks us to read information in from the command line here. So if we go through and run this, we'll actually prompt you for these pieces of information and then print some information out. So I'll get you to create these classes, the input example and the hello world example, compile them and run them just to make sure that your environment's all set up correctly, and as a quick bit of revision, and then move on to the next bit. So that's actually, this code is actually just available. I just grabbed it from a code project tutorial just to get us started here. So make sure you can compile those programs. So in this particular situation, you'd create a class. So remember in Java that our .java files have to have a name that matches the class within. So for example, our hello world class is stored in a file named hello-world.java with maintaining correct case there. For our input example, you'll create a file called input-example.java, and you'll compile it using the Java C compiler, just in the same way as you can see here in this example. So run through and do that one, compile and run the examples just to make sure that they're all working on your system. So, a little bit more housekeeping here. Before we can actually connect up using the Java database connectivity connector there, we actually need to download the appropriate PostgreSQL driver. So JDBC actually works with basically any database system you can imagine. There are drivers for all of the major database management systems, so Oracle, MySQL, Microsoft Server, they all have drivers, including Postgres. You actually need to go and download the driver and make it available on your system. And how you're going to do that is you can actually just go to this link here, and I've actually downloaded the PostgreSQL 9.4 JDBC connector for you, and that's hosted on the COMP389 website. So go and download that one, and download it to your current working directory. So it needs to be in your working directory. So when you download that one, you should have a directory like you can see up the top here. So I'm in my prac4 directory, and I've actually downloaded the JDBC driver, and you can see it comes up. It's a .jar file, so it's a Java archive file. Now, in order to make use of the classes that are stored within that precompiled Java archive, we actually need to uncompress it. So we actually use the jar command on Turing with the -xf flag. So we just go jar PostgreSQL 9.4 .jar, and that will actually unpack, and it'll actually unpack these two directories. It's actually the org directory and the meta-inf directory. So if we go back to my session here, the org directory is the one that we're interested in because it actually contains all of the class files. So if you just have that sitting in your present working directory, so this is where you're going to create and run all of your Java programs from, your Java programs, the Java virtual machine, will be able to find all of the classes that you require to run your JDBC programs. So once you've got that done, you've extracted those, and you have your org and meta-inf directories available in your present working directory, it's time to actually go and get your first program connected up to your database. So we'll look at the first sample program. This program simply connects up to the database. It actually doesn't do very much. It just selects all of the employees. It selects the first name and last name from the employee directory and just prints it out to the terminal. So you can see here that we've actually imported some libraries into our Java program. We've imported java.sql. We've got the wildcard there, so we're getting all classes from our Java SQL library, and we've also imported the Java util library, just so we've got access to some additional classes there that we need for plumbing our data and iterating over our data. So we can start here by, in our main function, the first thing we do is we create a connection object. We actually specify that as null to start with. Then we have a few curious lines here to set our connection up. So the first one is our class, this class.forName function. That actually dynamically loads the PostgreSQL driver class into the Java virtual machine. So it actually goes into the class path that you just unzipped. So if we go back to our session, you actually just unzip the org PostgreSQL packages here, and it actually grabs this driver.class out of that. So that actually loads the driver into the Java virtual machine. So now you can connect up, use it to a Postgres database. We then specify this connection string. So connection string, basically it's a string piece of data that has all of the connection parameters that we need. We start by specifying the driver and database that we're going to use. We then specify the host, which in this case is going to be Turing, so we're just using localhost for that one. And then we specify the name of our database. So in this situation, we've created a database which will be your UNE username _apps_prac4. So you just need to fill that one in. Then we actually go and we connect up to our database. So here we have to specify the username that we want to connect as and the password. So in this situation, the username is going to be the user that we set up for you, that you should have already connected up with before there, and your UNE student number. So that will actually connect up to the database that you created in the housekeeping section of this prac earlier on. We actually have some exceptions there to capture as well. So we've actually captured a class not found exception, so that you'll get that exception if you can't load your driver up, and you'll get your SQL exception if the database isn't there or isn't available either. So we're exiting on both of those situations there. So you've got to catch those using your try catch block for part of your error checking. So now that we're connected up to our database, we're going to go and retrieve a list of our employees. So the first thing we do is we print some stuff out to the terminal just to make everything look pretty. We've actually done some output formatting here. So we've used the printf function, which you may not be familiar with from COMP389, and we've actually specified this formatting string. We'll look at that here in a second. It actually says, basically that says that we want that in a left justified, we want 2 columns of left justified data that are 12 characters wide. That's what we've said here. So the first name, last name, this string here rather, will be put in the first column, and this string, which is our last name, will be in the second column, and then we actually just want a new line to go in there, and then we've actually put an underline in there as well. We then specify the query that we want to execute in our database. Now, we want to select all of our employees. In particular, we want the first name and last name. So we're just selecting all of our employees from our employee table, and we're grabbing the first name and last name for each. And we store that in a string called query. Next, we actually create a statement object. So we just set that to null as a placeholder. And we then call, so remember we set up this connection object up above here. So that's our connection object that we've set up, connected to our database. We then call the connection, the create statement member from that connection function to create our statement, and then we go and we call the statement object's execute query function, passing in our query stored in our string here above as our argument to that one. So that will go off to our database, and it'll actually execute our query on the database management system. The database management system will return a big list of results, and that's actually restored in this result set object. So the result set object is supplied by the SQL package that we've imported up the top here. And the result set actually allows us to iterate through each of the rows of data returned and actually print it out here. So we can see here we've got our result set, which we've called RS, and we're going to iterate through that using the next function. So when we call rs.next, it moves to the next row of data, and actually we actually print that out using the getString function. So we can call the getString function for the current row. So basically this result set keeps track of what row it's currently up to, and when we call the rs.getString, it'll print the string that relates to that particular attribute. So remember, recall up here that in our query we returned fname and lname. So here we're actually grabbing for each row of data the first name and last name attribute, so the attribute for each of those tuples. And again, we're printing that out using our formatted string as before. So we're printing that out to get our list of tuples there. So if we go through and run that one, we'll actually get, well, you can see where I've run it before there, but we'll run through and clear that one. We can actually run through and check that. So I've substituted in my username and password into this one before and already compiled it. And you can see here that it returns a list of employees from my database. So I've got my first name and last name. They've been formatted into columns using our formatting, and then we return all of our first names and last names for each employee out of our database there. So go through, compile and run that program to make sure that you can connect up and grab data out of your database, and make sure you digest what's going on in that one as well. So analyze the objects that we're using and the actual the process that we follow there. So there's just a bit of a walkthrough here of what I've just gone through in that program. So the final step there is actually the formatting stuff where we print it out. So as I mentioned before, we're using the printf function. That's probably the only thing that's particularly foreign in terms of printing the output there. And we actually format that. So we're saying here that we want left justification is specified by the minus symbol. So you could change it to a plus if you want right justification. And you can also specify the width of your columns there. If you want to learn more about that one, there's a URL there for you to go and have a look at that talks about your formatting using the printf function. So there's a couple of exercises for you here. I want you to modify that program so it also displays, in addition to the first name and last name, it also displays the birth date and sex there. So go through and modify that so that it basically has those 2 additional columns. And then I'll get you to modify it again so it also displays the department name and location. So you'll have to go and actually perform some table joins to link the employee to the department table. So I've got two exercises there to do. So all you have to do is create, basically for the second one, you'll just be adding your new columns, department name and location, and you'll be adjusting the query So it returns the appropriate, it executes the appropriate query in here. So you go and construct that query, then just drop it into here, and it'll return the data that you're after. So the final section in today's prac looks at actually updating records. So we saw here we've got a nice example of retrieving data from our database. What happens if we want to update our data in our database? Now we can do that by using, by going through the similar process again. We connect up to our database, we'll get our driver, connect up to our database. We create our statement and we actually return, in this example we're going to update an employee record. We're actually going to insert a new record into our employee table. So we start off by going through again creating a statement. The only additional items here, we've got some additional parameters we're passing into our create statements function on the connection object. That actually specifies that we can scroll through the results and create new results and actually update them. So it says that basically you can update the database via this connection. We then execute, the first step that we go through is we actually execute a query where we grab all columns of data from our employee table. We then store them in our result set, and in this example we've called that our update result set, or UPRS. We then call this move to insert row function. So what this does basically creates a new row in this result set. So in that new row we update that new row that's been created with the items of data that we want to insert into our new database. So in this situation we're inserting a new record that has first name, middle initial and last name. So remember, in the employee table, the definition for which I've included here for your convenience, we only actually have to specify the social security number because it's a primary key, the first name and the last name, and all of the other data is actually optional. So we've specified a subset of our data here. We do that by calling the update string or update int functions if we're passing in an integer value. We then call this insert row function, which actually inserts the row of data into our database, and we then actually call the before first function to actually move the cursor. So remember, we're iterating through our data. We've just inserted a new row, so our cursor in our update result data set is actually sitting on this new row of data. We then move it back to the first row of data. So go through and compile that database. Once you've done compile and run that one, and after you've run that database, it should actually insert this new record into your database. So there's a walkthrough there for that one. Make sure you have a read of that one. So if you run that program a second time, what do you think will happen? So remember that the social security number is the primary key, the SSN field is the primary key. You can only ever have unique values in there, so you've already inserted this one. So what do you think will happen if we try to insert it again? So go through and try that one and see how it works. Now, the final exercise in this lab session, you're actually going to run through and create a program that actually connects up to the database and inserts a new employee record based upon the employee's information that you pass in there. So I've got you started off here by giving you a template. You've got to add all of so what we're going to do is read in the information for an employee from the keyboard. So we're reading in the first name, middle initial, last name, SSN, department number. You'll have to add the additional input fields there to read in any additional data, and you then need to go through and make the appropriate changes to this section of code based upon the examples that we've just shown to insert the data that we've just read in from the keyboard into our database. So basically we're creating a little terminal application here that allows us to create new employee records. So go through and fill out those sections of code there based upon what you've reviewed in the examples and what we've covered. And once you've got that compiled, you should be able to then insert new records into the employee table using your little program here. So that's all we've got for today's prac, guys. So make sure you work through those two examples. This prac will help you with practical assignment number 2, where you'll be building some data-driven applications. So let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, make sure you read the JDBC sections from chapter 13 and cover off on the practical exercises. So thanks, guys.